Good morning, everybody. So it's October 4th. Anybody know what month this is? Cybersecurity Awareness Month. How many, if we go into the next auditorium where they're discussing environment, how many people in there do you think know that Cybersecurity Awareness Month? None. What else is this month? Anybody else know what else is Awareness Month this month? This is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. So everywhere you look this month, you're going to see pink. You watch an NFL game, they're going to be throwing pink flags, they'll have pink towels. There's going to be news stories. You're going to see thousands of brave surviving women in pink running and stuff like that. The breast cancer awareness folks just put us to shame. Maybe that's kind of appropriate, but I think it's something that we need to learn from them. But you know what we really need to learn from them? Self-awareness in Awareness Month. Because we tend, maybe not this episode, but this conference, but we tend to really talk to ourselves in a bubble. I do a lot of work with outside groups, corporate boards and stuff like that, and one of the things that worries me is I'll go out and to the audience after we see panels of vendors and stuff like that, and particularly when our government friends do these presentations, and they say, we have an information sharing program, and we have automated learning, and we're doing this and that and nothing, and you know what the people in the audience think? Hey, you guys got this nailed. We do not have this nailed. We are losing big time. Now, in the breast cancer awareness field, despite the fabulous job that they're doing with awareness, Susan B. Komen organization has adopted a new motto, more than pink. We need more than what we're doing in cybersecurity. Do I need to use this, or do we have lava there?
You can get the radio. The podium mic should be fine.
The podium mic, okay. Okay. So let's start with the problem area. So right now we have about 80% of corporate profits, of corporate assets rather, are digital in nature, which means they're subject to cyber attack. One of the problems I think we've been having is that we have been thinking about this issue too small. We just had a wonderful panel on information sharing. That's great. It's a critical element of the problem, of the solution, but it is not the entire solution. In order to get people other than the cybersecurity people really involved in this, we need to be talking about this from an economics point of view. We need to be showing our business partners, our boards, our senior management, that they can actually measure cybersecurity in economic terms so that they can do a better job at assessing their unique risk appetite, and then they can develop a corporate strategy. We need to tell them that they don't need to be technological experts, but just like every board of director is not a financial expert, but knows how to read a financial statement, same thing has to be the case with cybersecurity. We need to get them to the point where they can understand what we're talking about, and in order to do that, we have to get away from the notion that we are going to teach them about IT. They don't want to learn about IT. Corporate boards do not talk about NIST frameworks and ISO standards. They talk about mergers and acquisitions and product innovation and strategic partnership. So we need to, and they talk about money, right? It's all about the money. So the very first principle in the NACD Cyber Risk Handbook is that cybersecurity is not an IT issue. It is an enterprise-wide risk management issue. That's a very, very different thing. So what we're going to talk about a little bit today is how we can conceptualize cybersecurity a little bit differently to maybe reach outside our bubble. Now, this is the way that business people think about IT. They think about IT simply as a way to grow the business. That's the conversation about IT. And the reality, however, is that most IT, while it does help grow the business, actually undermines security. PwC came out with a statement last year that it's now becoming obvious that the accelerating pace of technological change is the most creative force and also the most destructive one in the cyber ecosystem. So what we need to do is find a way so that we can help our friends, our colleagues, our partners in the business world develop a calculus so that they can better understand what cyber risk is, so that they can measure it, so that they can set their risk appetite, and we can have more appropriate spending in the space. The technology is just how the cyber attacks occur. In order to get to these people, we need to explain why the cyber attacks occur. And that's mostly an economic issue. But the problem with cyber economics is it's all upside down. As Anderson and Moore pointed out, security failure is caused at least as often by bad economic incentives as by bad technological design. Economists have known that liability should be assigned to the entity that can manage risk, yet everywhere we look, we see online risk allocated poorly. People who connect their machines to risky places do not bear the full consequences of their actions, and developers are not compensated for the costs of strengthening security code. Now, actually, we all know this, right? So we all know that if you're a lousy cyber citizen, you use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 as your password on all your websites, and you go to a lot of sketchy websites, and so you get your credit card hacked. And the hacker runs up $100,000 on the credit card. How much do you pay? 50 bucks. The banks pick up the rest, except the banks don't really pick up the rest. They charge it back to the rest of us in fees and interest rates, which actually means we, good citizens, are subsidizing the lousy cyber citizens. The economics are upside down. Same thing, people are always asking, well, why don't the IT guys make more secure products? The reason the IT guys don't make more secure products is because there's no market for secure IT products. The philosophy in the IT community is get it to market quick, we'll fix it later. We'll put in updates or patches or whatever. They're simply not compensated. And the reason is we don't demand it. So how many people here, this is a sophisticated audience, how many of you asked about the security on your cell phone before you bought it? That's an enormous number. 3 people, usually nobody says, and I sometimes doubt the 3 actually, but I believe you, but like we don't do this, and this is, by the way, true in business and government too. One of my sponsors makes computers, and the Defense Department came to them and said, hey, these computers have a supply chain problem, isn't it? And they said, well, we can fix that. It costs you an extra $2 a computer. And the Pentagon said, no, thank you. We do not value security, by which I mean we are unwilling to pay for security. The market is completely convoluted with regard to cybersecurity. A lot of the things we think we know really aren't true. One of them, for example, is what happens if you have a major high-profile attack? Most people think, well, the business is going to go down the toilet. I mean, nobody's going to shop at Target anymore. But this is what actually happens to the stock prices on major hacks. In Sears, it was up 86% in 6 months. Target was up 20% in a year. Sony was up 47%. Home Depot up 27%. The stock prices increased. They didn't fall. Now, the point I'm making here is not that breaches are good for stock values. That's not the point. The point is that we do not understand the economics of this issue, and until we get this down right, we're still going to have the problems we have. This is true with regard to the internet as a general. The internet is weak. It is getting weaker all the time. Long internet supply chains, Internet of Things, bring your device to work, cloud computing. All these things are great for business and tend to undermine security. Now, of course, you can manage that, but that comes with increased cost. And that's the question that the boards of directors face. How much can I afford to buy in terms of security? So that's the conundrum that we faced on the good guy's side. Now let's look at the bad guy's side. This is the cost of running a cyber crime business. You can go on the dark web and you can outsource a distributed denial of service attack for $700. You can get access to corporate mailboxes for $500. You can get fake IDs in social media, Instagram, Twitter, it's $100. We estimate that the costs of cyber crime now run between $500 billion and $2.5 trillion. Now, those are hard numbers to understand, so if we take the minimum, that means the cyber crime industry is larger than the GDP for Sweden, Poland, Belgium. If we take it on the high side, it's higher than the GDP for Mexico, and twice that. So it doesn't make any difference which end of those numbers you choose to believe in. It's just enormous. This is the cybercrime by the number. We had 4.8 billion records lost to cybercrime last year. There are 80 billion malicious scans that internet service providers report every day. There are 300 million new malicious viruses created every day, 400 ransomware attacks a day. This is a vibrant, good business. McAfee Cybercrime said that criminals at the high end are as technologically sophisticated as the most advanced IT companies, and like them have moved quickly to adopt cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and encryption. This is the balance we have. Cyber attacks are cheap, easy, profitable. Defense is hard after the fact. We have no law enforcement. We have a complete imbalance with respect to our cyber ecosystem. McAfee report goes on to say, this is the conclusion: cybercrime is relentless, undiminished, and unlikely to stop. It's just too easy, rewarding, and the chances of getting caught are far too low. Cybercrime also leads on a risk-to-payoff ratio. It is a low-risk crime with high profits. A smart cyber criminal can easily make millions without fear of being caught. Now, I want to make one side comment here, which is, and this is a little bit outside the norm, I am a big opponent of the myth, I believe, that all you need to do is the essentials. You do need to do the essentials, and yes, the essentials will stop most of the attacks, but it's not going to stop the attacks we really care about. These guys are really sophisticated. They're making $2.5 trillion a year, or maybe it's only $500 billion a year, and they reinvest in the business. So somebody was mentioning Heartbleed, I think, in the last panel. Heartbleed was a vulnerability we didn't even know about. They discovered it later, and cyber criminals found that for us. So we need to understand that we are dealing with really sophisticated, high-end people. The essentials are not going to get it done. You have to start there, but that's not the end. So we do a lot of work, as I said, with the National Association of Corporate Directors, and I want to talk a little bit about what we do. What we are suggesting, I think, is that we need to be looking at this issue from the top down, not just from the bottom up. If we want to establish a culture of security, that isn't going to come out of the IT department. I think we all know this. You know, we need it coming down from the top. So we start with the NACD Handbook. The NACD Handbook is available to everybody free of charge. It is the only private sector publication that is endorsed by DHS and DOJ. We now have similar copies of it in the UK, in Germany. Last week we just announced a copy from the Organization of American States. We'll be doing one for Europe a little bit later on. Globally, we are trying to establish a framework at the board level, not the IT level, for boards to understand cybersecurity, and this is what basically it is. Guidelines from the NACD say that you view cyber risks from an enterprise-wide standpoint, understand the potential and legal risks, discuss cybersecurity preparedness with management, consider the threats in a global context of the organization's overall tolerance of risk. The important part, though, is that PwC has actually independently assessed the use of the Cyber Risk Handbook, and they found this. Boards appear to be listening to this advice. Last year, we saw a double-digit uptick in board participation in most aspects of information security. Deepening board involvement has improved cybersecurity practices in numerous ways. As more boards participate in cybersecurity budget discussions, we saw a 24% increase in cybersecurity spending. Notable outcomes cited by the survey respondents include the identification of key risks, fostering an organizational culture of security, better alignment of cybersecurity with overall risk management and business goals, and perhaps more than anything, board participation opened the lines of communication between cybersecurity function and the top executives. So this is a rare case where we actually have an independent assessment that indicates this stuff actually works. But this is only a superficial level. We need to go a little bit further. I want to talk about two of the principles in the Cyber Risk Handbook, which we think really need to be adopted broader. Principle number 4 is that you need to establish a cyber risk framework. We mean this in two different senses. First, of course, you need to have a sound technical framework. ISO standards, NIST standards, if you follow a regulatory model, a lot of this is determined for you. Most sophisticated organizations actually piece together a bunch of different things. However, we need to understand that if you are dealing with just analyzing from these frameworks, basically we don't have any assurance that that is actually improving security. So most of these frameworks, et cetera, get lumped into heat maps and these long lists of requirements, and you're supposed to go through and check them off. That's how you demonstrate compliance. Problem is, if you've got 500 items on the list, you don't know if you have to go to all 500, or can you stop at 250, and then you're adequately secure. Or maybe you have to get to 251, or maybe you need to start at 251 and go to 500. We don't know, and that's kind of a problem. So we need to start by assessing these sorts of frameworks. Doug Hubbard, in his book, which I would recommend to everyone, How to Measure Anything in Cybersecurity, did a review of the literature and found there is not a single study indicating that the use of such methods actually reduces risk. Not that these things shouldn't be done, but we need to do more. So this is an illustration that I borrowed from a friend of mine at Risk Lens, Nick Senna. This is a bald tire, if you can't see it. How many people think that that's risky? It's a bunch of you I am not driving home with. Mostly that's pretty risky. So, now how many think it's risky? The point is, two people don't want to be on a swing up here. The point is, you have to understand not just the entity, you have to understand it in its context. So now, it's less risky, I assume you do. Unless, you look at it more closely. You have to understand not just the context, but the supply chain, if you will. We need to be thinking about more. We need to be thinking about more than technical compliance with various frameworks. We need to be thinking of it in a broader context. We also need to get a lot clearer about what we mean when we say cyber risk. A lot of people, when they talk about cyber risk, say, well, the supply chain is a risk, or the insider is a risk, or the cloud is a risk. Those are just categories. They are not risks. You can find risk within them. But if we're going to talk to the boards and senior management and make them understand this is how we should be defining cyber risk. This is what they want to know. How much money am I going to lose from a given cyber event over a specific kind of time? That's the kind of thing that we need to be presenting to them in terms of cyber risk. If we can put it in these terms, we will get much more ability to understand and work with us a little bit more collectively. And the good news is we can do some of this. So the other part of the, we're going to get to how you can do that in just a minute. The other part of establishing a framework is you need to establish a management framework. We have to get cybersecurity out of the IT department. Obviously, the IT department needs to be included, the CIO, the CTO, CISO, of course. But cybersecurity also includes the HR department. It includes the legal department, it includes the finance department, it includes the public relations department. One of the things a board really cares about is the reputational risk that comes after cyber. All of these people need to be put together. What we advocate is you need an enterprise-wide risk management team with a separate budget, not the IT budget, separate cybersecurity budget, meets regularly, and probably shouldn't be run by IT. It's an old saying, you know, if you, to a hammer, everything looks like a nail. If you have IT running this, then you're going to get IT solutions. You're going to need some of those, but you're also going to need training. You're also going to need contracts. You're going to need a lot of other things if you're going to develop a resilient cybersecurity organization. So you need critical thinking. You need an understanding of probability. You need training in calibrated estimation, comfort with numbers, decision methods, and above all, you need understanding of the business. One of my board members was at a board meeting a couple of months ago, and she told a story about how the senior management came to her and said, hey, we got this new product we're launching. Can you secure this for us? And she said, you should have talked to me 3 years ago when you were designing the product, not now, or 2 years ago when you were signing the contracts with our suppliers, you know, so that I could have put things in. No, they come at the end. We can't be thinking this way. Cybersecurity is an inherent part of the business. Cybersecurity needs to be thought of in the same sense as legal and finance. Companies don't make a single major decision without consulting legal and finance. And in the 21st century, you also have to discuss cybersecurity. You're doing a merger and acquisition, enormous cybersecurity issues there. You're doing a new product and designing a supply chain, enormous cybersecurity issues. Ed will talk about that in a couple minutes. You know, virtually every one of these decisions involves these things. So we have to have this linked to the business, and the frameworks themselves don't do that. So we advocate a couple of things in the Cyber Risk Handbook. I won't go through them in great detail. This is one model that we use. This is kind of a basic model. The better model, frankly, is what is now coming out of the financial services community, where they have the 3 lines of defense model, where you have the first line of defense that actually operates the business and owns the risk. The second model defines the policy statements, et cetera, and then Typically, internal audit will check on all of them. So you have an internal process that is going back and forth and checking these things. You don't have one person or even one department who's deciding what your cybersecurity risk and posture ought to be. So you need a technical framework and you need an organizational framework. Principle number 5, and this is where I think we get to good news. There's, I have gone to meetings for years. I probably have done it here at the Future organization, where I've said there are only 2 kinds of companies. Those that know they've been successfully compromised, and those that don't know that they have been successfully compromised. There now may be a third, and this is what Dick Clark talks about in his new book, the resilient company. The company that is compromised but is able to manage it because they have understood the cyber problem well and they have invested appropriately. You can't, we're not gonna have 25% increases in budgets every year. We're gonna need to understand how to do this a little bit better. So we need to start by understanding what risks to accept, which ones to mitigate, and which ones to transfer. That means we have to focus on outcomes, not the attacks. So none of this reporting that we blocked 5,000 or 1 million intrusions. That's a meaningless happy stat. If you blocked 1 million intrusions, that sounds really good unless there were 2 million attempts, right? So you need clear terms, better scoping, no more bogus math. You have to place events in a quantitative sense so that we can prioritize them in the business, and we can tell the organizations up above, you don't need to be spending on this anymore, you need to be spending more on that. We need to make much better decisions. And fortunately, there are now products coming on the market that can help you do this. Factor analysis of information risk, X analytics. The market is moving towards better understanding of what these things are. So what you need to do is you need to exactly know what your risk appetite is, what data and how much you're willing to compromise. How do you divide cybersecurity investments between the basic and the advanced? What are your appropriate models for transfer? How should we assess impact? And then of course you have to practice, practice, practice. So this is the basic model that we can use, or we advocate the companies use, to do a sophisticated cyber risk assessment. You start by getting the best available data. And there is data. I mean, we just had a whole discussion of the ISACs. The ISACs have data. Government agencies has data. Most of the companies by now have data. This is not new anymore. This is not Y2K. You've got 20 years of this now. So you get the best data that you can, and you focus on what scenarios are most likely for you and what's the loss that's going to happen. So if you're a hospital, maybe you're more afraid of a ransomware attack because you've got a lot of personal data, as opposed to if you're an IT company where you're more concerned about somebody actually stealing your data, your IP. Those are entirely different kinds of attacks. To steal IP, you got to get in, you got to find the data, you got to get out. So an exfiltration strategy, can stop. Just block the outbound traffic. It's not going to help you if you're worrying about ransomware, because they don't care about getting out. They're just going to encrypt the data. You have to understand what is the most likely scenario, and this is what management needs to tell them. Then you calculate the best case, the worst case, most likely case. And that way you can determine what degree of loss is acceptable. That's your risk appetite. Once you have the risk appetite, you know what you can invest in to bring your risk down to a level that is an acceptable level of risk. And if you're going to be sophisticated about this, you run Monte Carlo simulations. Monte Carlo simulations is basically the same thing that we do in the rest of business. You put it in a computer, you run 1,000 scenarios, see what's most likely, how your loss is going to come out. We can do all this now. So the point that I'm trying to make is, much like the breast cancer awareness folks, we need to do cybersecurity more. We can do cybersecurity more. We have to understand that we have been thinking maybe a little bit too small, consistent with what the last panel just said. We need to work together. But that doesn't just mean the IT people need to work together. We need to work together throughout the entire organization, including senior management, legal, finance, and the boards of directors. Thank you very much.